Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and begin in prayer? Yeah, Jared, could I ask you to pray?
Yeah. All right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the grace, and I thank you that we can still share in each other's lives, even being separated for this time. I thank you that we will, if all things go according to plan, be able to start in some semblance meeting together next week. Lord, as we come during this time, Lord, I just pray that you would help us to enter into this time of teaching, Lord, that you would help Chad to teach. It's been about a month of differences, and I know there's more distractions in the home. There's some difficulty in this, but Lord, you can still use this to encourage your people, and I pray that you would do that. So just use this time and again, help us, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, well, the message today is going to be just kind of an overview of this section, and we'll identify what that whole section is here shortly. But the story of Jacob and Esau and how this blessing was partially stolen. I use that word intentionally, partially stolen by Jacob from Esau, and most importantly, and the most important thing in this whole section is that the purpose of God continued and was established despite the actions, the failures, the unrighteous schemes of every other party involved. Everyone is to blame here. Everyone will have egg on their face. Everyone failed miserably. There's no one in this story other than God who it was above board. And we will see that by the time we get done. But that's kind of the main point, is that, when everyone else failed and did wrong, like God still did what he said he was going to do and established his word and kept his promises and his oath that he swore to Abraham. And he did his part. He was faithful. It's kind of an example of what Paul says, when we're faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. He's steadfast. So the message today will be the first of what will probably be 8 messages on this section. I don't really feel like there's much way to divide it up any other way. So today my purpose is just to begin looking at it, consider the passage as a whole, to understand, I think, the general point, the big picture kind of points that are made, the purpose to the story, as it sets within the larger context of what Genesis has been doing here recently in recent chapters. And so I just want to kind of fit it into that and help us with all of this. So I'm going to share some things first from previous chapters to kind of catch us up to speed. And so have these things in our head, and then we will read this whole section. From Genesis 26:34 all the way to chapter 28, verse 9. We'll read that, and then we will begin to work through some of the details of the passage and make some applications. So the first thing, just to recall, I think if we were to go back, we're in Genesis 26 right now, back up a little bit to Genesis and 25 and verse 23. You remember Rebecca was pregnant, and she is having one wild pregnancy, and she doesn't know what's going on at all. In verse 23, she goes to inquire of the Lord. In verse 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. So this happened, and then the boys are named, and they were given names. one meaning that rather like he's rough and rough handling, and the other, he takes by the heel. And this is, all of this kind of sets us up for certain things. And we'll consider that in just a minute. But then also notice then, then you have the story about Esau selling his birthright, which is, an awful thing that happens that he does. But we read about that. And then chapter 26, it seems like it's just inserted in the story about Jacob and Esau, where, we started talking about Jacob and Esau and about them, and then we stop and we talk about God's promise to Isaac to bless him. We see that worked out, what we saw last week about these things with Abimelech and the way that God provided and blessed Isaac again and again. And then we jump into chapter 27. We're back to Jacob and Esau, and they're kind of struggling for this blessing. And what's the point of chapter 26? And so I just we'll talk briefly about that. So that's kind of what I'm meaning to bring into the story here with us, is everything from the beginning of Jacob and Esau's story to now in the text. So it's just like a chapter and a half. We're trying to gather up the important information and take it with us. So what do we want to say about these things? First of all, this oracle that is given by God. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. So there are twins. And, verse 24, when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The oracle was true. They're able to see that right then. So what's going on? We are, I think, expected to read this oracle about what God said will happen and look for it, right? I mean, if you were someone living at the time and you heard this was told to her, you would be expectant and thinking, what will come of these babies or of this pregnancy, such that there will be 2 nations in her womb, and 2 peoples from within her shall be divided. One will be stronger than the other. The older serve the younger. What is that going to look like? And so as we shouldn't let that be lost on us. When we read their story, we should be anticipating seeing these sorts of things. We should see, here are these 2 boys that are born. So immediately you should think, here are going to be 2 boys that both do so well that they become nations in and of themselves. But they're not going to be friendly with one another. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. Right? There's going to be great division. So we should expect that this is not going to go well, that there's going to be real division and, in ways that is even beyond typical sibling rivalries. I don't know, however bad you might think it is, typically in a kind of the average family, every brothers and sisters kind of have their little squabbles and things, but they still get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they see each other for various things. That still generally happens. But we're told here that there's going to be real division. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. What else? The one shall be stronger than the other. I'm not sure, again, who that is, right? I think it's actually Jacob that they have in mind here. The one shall be stronger than the other. And then the other one, the older, shall serve the younger. So there's going to be distinctions that we can make when we observe these boys' lives between one he's just far stronger and capable and able, has more ability in the world than the other does. We're going to see that. One shall be stronger than the other. And then the other one, the older, it says, shall serve the younger. So the other thing that we know is that the older child, whichever one comes out first, is going to serve the younger one. And that's a reversal of what's typical. So we should expect some real reversal of typical roles. We should expect that the younger one is going to end up on top, in a sense, and will be served in some way by his older, or his or her at this time, older sibling, right? So this is what happens. This is what we are to expect. So when we read, you ought to be thinking in those ways when you read later stories. Now, that's the context for what's following. Is there's this great division that's going to come. There's going to be 2 powerful nations, or two boys that'll be powerful enough to become nations. How about that? Say it that way. They'll be blessed in some sense, both of them, because they're going to become nations. But there'll be sharp division. There'll be a difference in terms of strength and ability in the world, and one will be subservient to the other. The older will serve the younger. We're looking for those things as we go on. Now then, the boys are born. We don't expect to see a lot of this worked out yet, but we should expect to see some things that are consistent with what the oracle of God has been. And what we read in the story about the first one, not too big of a deal. The first one came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. So he's this rough-looking boy, baby. He's so hairy, and he's given that name. Later on, of course, his name he's given another name, Edom, which means red. And so he's, in so many ways, he's connected to his red hair. But so here he is. He's born, and this is the older one, of course. And not too much to say about him at first, other than his appearance. But then afterward, something amazing happens during this birthing process. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. He takes by the heel. So at the very beginning, the younger one is not just, it doesn't seem going to end up, on top. He's taking the heel. He's taking what belongs to the other one. So it seems to be at the beginning that the way the older one's going to end up serving the younger is the younger one's going to take it. He's just stronger than his older brother. Like, he's more aggressive. He's more assertive. He's conniving. He's shrewd. He is out to get what he wants, and he wants what belongs to his brother, and he's going to take it, and he's going to have it. So this is what, how it appears. And you wouldn't be surprised if you were to see the pregnancy, or the delivery, that is, and Jacob grabbing Esau's heel in this way that is very stunning and doesn't happen like this. And so it was a shock to people. You wouldn't be surprised if someone said, I bet these boys aren't going to get along. And so this is what I mean. This is consistent already with what we've been told. Two peoples from within you shall be divided. Even though you don't see it in full form here, you just begin, everything we read so far is consistent with this oracle. We're not surprised. We're surprised at the events, but then we think, oh, well, that is consistent with, we shouldn't be surprised to see these things worked out. It's amazing to see them worked out already at so young of an age, beginning to take shape. But this is what we're seeing. And then we read about, the boys growing up. Esau is one kind of man. He's a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Well, Jacob was not that way. He dwelled in the tents, right? And he was some translations say a quiet man or a peaceful man, but it seems to be more just kind of a sophisticated man. He was kind of the quiet thinker of the group. And he certainly wasn't a peaceful man. Everything we know about him says he wasn't much of a peaceful man. But Isaac, his father, was a peaceful man. We learn about that in chapter 26. So we see that. Then Esau, what does he do? He goes and he sells his birthright. I mean, this guy is so lacking in self-control that he comes in, he's a little bit hungry, and he's either back at camp and he could have anything from anyone, or he's out in the field, near the tents where Jacob would be, with the sheep, and he's there, and he, comes upon camp and the food is ready made and he wants food, but he doesn't want just some of the food that's there. He has to have particularly this one dish that Isaac has prepared. He's got to have this red meat. He wants the red stuff, and he's willing even to give him his birthright. It's crazy that Jacob is conniving enough and just he's trying to take advantage of the situation so much that he even puts this question out there, sell me your birthright and you can have it. But Esau, foolishly enough, does it. He just doesn't seem to have much desire for these things. What's it matter? He gets his food from the forest anyway. What's he need his birthright for, I guess? But he didn't want it. And we read in verse 34, the summary of this, thus, the last part of verse 34, thus, in this way, Esau despised his birthright. Now we read that and we just think, oh, okay, that's just kind of giving us information. But you've got to understand, this is written to about a culture that had a very different view about a birthright, and it's written to a culture that had a very different view about a birthright. I mean, this was precious. This represented your double portion of your inheritance. So it's if nothing else, it's a foolish purchase. You gave away a massive amount for a very little thing. But also it has connected with it all the honors and privileges that went with being the firstborn in that culture and in the world at large at this time. To give all that away, to trade it for just a bowl of bean soup is just, there's no other explanation. You despised it. You can't just say you were foolish. That was a dumb decision. Like, that's not what the text says. It doesn't say, thus Esau was a fool. It says he despised his birthright. Here's a man who doesn't take proper stock of what he has available to him. I mean, he had the birthright and he just gave it away. He despised this thing. There's no other explanation than to think that he just didn't care about it at all. He saw this as a low thing. Whereas Jacob, he doesn't have much going for him, but he does have that. He did rightly appraise the value of a birthright, and he did seek to get it however he could. And he got it now. And so he has that going for him. Now, there's the birthright. What's the other thing that one of these children might get from their father? Well, it's the blessing. And it is to the blessing that Genesis chapter 26 turns and explains. This is the point of Genesis chapter 26. It tells us a lot about Isaac. It tells us a lot about God's faithfulness to him. It tells us about God's promise to him and his faithfulness to Abraham. We learn about Isaac and his peacefulness. We learn about his growth in holiness and godliness and the way that he, in many ways, became a very godly man. We learn about the fulfillment of some of the things that God had promised to Abraham, and that here for Isaac, he's seeing things that Abraham didn't see. He's seeing the nations come to him to seek blessing, not just to seek to be on peaceful terms, but they know that he's blessed of God, and they want to get connected to him and have peace with him so that they can get some blessing too. They recognize this. They state pretty much basically that same thing. But the point of 26, I think, is to mainly demonstrate the value of the blessing. Like all the things that Isaac is experiencing in terms of the prosperity. He sows in the middle of a famine, sows in a crop, and he yields 100-fold. Everywhere he goes, he's finding water, fresh well springs, and people drive him off, and he finds another one. He'll drive him off and finds another. I mean, where are all these springs? How come they couldn't find any of these things? Well, because he's blessed of God. Now, the greatest blessing that he has from God isn't really found here so much in 26. But this is kind of like, I would say this: Genesis 26 is mainly demonstrates to us in terms of what it's setting us up for Jacob and Esau. It demonstrates kind of the side benefits, the perks, if you will, of being blessed of God. Like if God has set his gaze on you to bless you in this time and place, it meant all these side benefits of him prospering you in this way. That was a tremendous benefit. And so these side benefits is what we see in chapter 26. It's real, it's recognizable, these perks of being blessed of God and being in relationship with God. It means security even in the midst of hardships and famine and hostility. You're secure. God's protecting you. He's provided. It means absolute certainty, even if you don't fight for it, that this belongs to you. Isaac wasn't fighting for these things. He was just, he's pushed off the land. He goes elsewhere. Finally, he finds that God provided room for him and is protecting him, providing abundantly for him, even out in the land that no one else wants to inhabit. And so wherever he goes, whatever the circumstances, God is blessing him. It's absolutely certain. So this is wonderful. This is a valuable prize, even on an earthly level. You don't have to have a spiritual bone in your body. You can be like Abimelech, or you can be like Esau and still want this blessing. Like this is something, this would be good to have in your back pocket. If you could have a blessing like this, that God would give you all these things and protect you and provide you in these ways. This is something worth fighting for, worth having. Esau might have despised his birthright, but he's been around to see some of this blessing. And, he's foolish enough. He's He's wrong-headed enough. His priorities are bad, are wrong enough that he may in fact sell a birthright for a meal, but he's not foolish enough to not want the blessing. He wants that. And that is what takes us into this next chapter. Is we've seen the greatness of this blessing, the certainty of the blessing, the faithfulness of God to give it. And that's what's at play here. Who's going to end up with that? That's what we see. Now, because we've read from the chapters before, we should be expected to see that Jacob's going to get it. Shouldn't be surprised to see that. The older will serve the younger. He's taken by the heel, this kind of thing. It seems likely that he's going to end up getting it somehow, some way. We don't know how, but there's this other great thing that Isaac has that's going to be passed on, and somebody's going to get it. And so kind of the questions would be, who's that going to pass to? How is it going to pass? And how will this oracle work itself out in the midst of that transaction and all of this happening? And that's how we come into Genesis, this next section that begins in Genesis chapter 26 and verse 34. Let's read that section. And we'll begin then. So when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die." Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing." His mother said to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, bring them to me." So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son, and the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread, which she had prepared, into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him, and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, Are you really my son Esau?" And he answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it near me, that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, Come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him, and said, See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. His father Isaac said to him, Who are you? He answered, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed. As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And then he said, Have you not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said to Esau, Behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And then Isaac his father answered and said, Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day? Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. These are the Hittite women that Esau had married. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you, and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Paddan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he directed him, You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Paddan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. All right. It's a mouthful for sure. It's a big section. But I do think it belongs as a section. Let me just explain that. Well, actually, yeah, let me just kind of explain that a little bit. So we start out in verse 34 of chapter 26. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So this is kind of we pick up with Jacob and Esau with this reminder about Esau and that he took these wives and just made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. It's not a good prologue, not a good return to see what Esau's like. The last thing we saw, he despised his birthright. Now he's marrying multiple wives from these pagan lands, and he's making life bitter for his family. This is really hard. And then at the end of the middle of chapter 28, the end of our reading, verse 8. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. So Esau despises his birthright, marries multiple women, pagan women, who make life bitter and miserable for his parents. Then when all of these things happen, so then he misses out on the blessing. He's all upset about that. He decides he's gonna kill his brother. His brother gets sent off. He sees his father bless Jacob with this Abrahamic blessing. He sees that he sends him away to go marry women from his mother's family. He sees all of that. He sees that his own wives have been a real source of bitterness and contention for his parents. And what does he do? This guy decides he's going to rectify the situation by taking more wives, also not from the one place where they want Jacob to get a wife. He's going to take them from Ishmael, the one who was rejected in favor of Isaac. He's going to go to that family, those extended family members, and go get himself another wife. And it's like, is he trying to get Jacob's favor and just totally ignorant about how to do that? Or is he trying to thumb his nose at him and just get another wife who's going to make it even worse? It's hard to know actually what's in his mind here. But either way, this guy certainly did not draw the lesson he should have drawn in all of this. And so it's not surprising then. I mean, we already knew that God had said, it was going to be the younger son. But it's like, all of this is justified when we see Esau and the things that he does and the way that he lives. He's rightly passed over as the inheritor of the Abrahamic blessing. He's not worthy of it in any way. It's not wrong to pass him over. When you look at his life until now, he has failed in every account. He's demonstrated just godlessness. He's demonstrated unrighteousness, worldly mindedness. It's not good. Now, we will see that Jacob isn't much better, but my point is not to, to be down on Esau to show how great Jacob is, but just to show that Esau is not wrongly passed over. He wasn't the worthy child who got what he deserved, who didn't get what he deserved and was passed over unfairly. Like, he absolutely deserves to be passed over. He deserves to have nothing as a result of all this. Now, so I see it as a section as well as a unit, mainly for these reasons that, again, as we mentioned in 26, we start out with Esau and his marrying these certain wives, and then we end with Esau marrying this other wife. And so it seems to be the bookends of this section about the blessing. And both of them show very much Esau in a negative light, and that he had not repented from his earlier despising of his birthright. He had not repented from the wives that he had taken. He had not repented by losing the blessing. He had not repented when he saw the way his father gave the Abrahamic blessing to Jacob, he still didn't repent. This guy just went on into sin. Nothing caused him to pause and think, wait, I'm wrong here. I need to repent. I need to get right with God. He didn't care at all, it didn't seem. No thoughts of God at all from Esau. Now, so that, anyway, that's the kind of the beginning and the ending of this this section together. And I read it as such. I'm going to treat it as such. Now, let me just give an outline of the rest of what we find here briefly. Again, the beginning part of it, this prologue about Esau, you'll see some symmetry as we go through all this. You'll see, we talk about Esau and who he marries. He continues to demonstrate a real disregard and contempt for his parents and even for God himself as he marries these Canaanite women, these pagan women. Now, the next section, you can kind of divide up the whole rest of the story until the epilogue at the end about Esau marrying these other women. You can divide this into two halves. The first half would be chapter 27, verses 1 all the way to 29. And that would be this. It's kind of all about this great deception in the family. If you think of a story in terms of cause and effect, this would be the cause half of the story. This is the cause side of the story's cause and effect. And there are three sections here, three subsections within this, the causal side of things. And so the first one is, again, it's all about deception in the family. The first subsection here is the deceptive plan of Isaac and Esau. The deceptive plan of Isaac and Esau. I call it deceptive for several reasons, but without turning the message into a description of these sections, let me just say briefly, these kinds of things, these kinds of blessings were typically done in front of everyone. I mean, later when he blesses Jacob with the Abrahamic blessing, Esau's there. He sees all that. When Jacob later in his life blesses his descendants, he gathers them all together. It's a very public thing. You do it before your family with witnesses gathered round and before the Lord. And Isaac here in this instance, he decides to do this secretly in a secret meeting in his tent. Before the Lord, yes, but secretly in the tent. And this is just incredible. He doesn't invite witnesses. He wants to kind of slink off to the side and do this. So, and Esau is all too happy to play the part and go along with it. And again, I'm not going to explain all of my conclusions there. I'm just going to say right now in summary that this was a deceptive plan of Isaac and Esau. It was underhanded in some way. It was less than above board and honest. The next thing is we read about the deceptive plan of Rebekah and Jacob. So Rebekah and Jacob, and we all know that this is very much a deceptive plan. We read that in verses, basically verses 6 through 17, right? About this deceptive plan, that they are going to disguise him and all these things and bring him in with game and try to sneak in there before Esau gets back and steal this blessing. So that's their deception. And then we read in verses 18 through 29, when Jacob enters into the tent, we read about Jacob getting Esau's blessing. We read about the theft of Esau's blessing by Jacob. So in this first half, the kind of the causal side of things, we've read about the deceptive plan of Isaac and Esau, the deceptive plan of Rebekah and Jacob, and then we read about that deception put into play, it's carried out, and it's successful in so far as we read in that Jacob did successfully thieve away and steal Esau's blessing. Now, the effect of all this, we read about the cause side of things have been building. Now the negative side of things, what happens? Though there's the tremendous fallout in the family due to all this, and we go on reading there about the great distress and the upheaval within the family, the effect side of the story's cause and effect. And so here we read again about Isaac and Esau first, their great distress and their response when their plan kind of is kind of comes unraveled. They realize they've been found out and things didn't work as they planned. Verses 30 through 40, right? Verses 30 through 40, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And it goes on. And so we read about this, their great distress. Esau, we read about him crying out with a bitter cry, and an exceedingly great and bitter cry. Bless me, even me also, Father. Don't you have another blessing? And we read about Isaac trembling violently as a result of when he gets word of it. I mean, you think about that. I mean, he's been found out, and God let it happen. Like, he did this before the Lord, and God let him be deceived. And this is going to have to stand now. It's final. And he's shaken up quite literally by what he learns. It's very alarming to him. There's not many times in life where you shake violently at news. He did it here. Esau is crying out exceedingly great and bitter cries. He lifts up his voice. He weeps. Isaac tells him he's got nothing for him. The only blessing I can give you is an anti-blessing. And that's the kind of blessing he gets. It's incredible. And so this is their response. You see the distress. You see the upheaval in the family as a result of all this. You see it first with Isaac and Esau. First, you read about their deceptive plan. Now it's their turn to be undone and surprised by the disastrous consequences of what's taken place. Next, it's going to be Rebekah and Jacob's turn. And we turn to them in verses 41 through 45. Now, as a result of this, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. They did not expect the result of their scheming to be murderous threats and scheming. But that's what happened. He thought he was going to get away with this and just come out, smelling like roses on the other side, and things were going to be great. He was going to get this blessing. Look how good things have turned out. Listen to the words he said, Mom. This is the blessing he gave me. This is wonderful. And the next thing he hears from his mother is this other report. Your brother's comforting himself about what has happened by saying he's going to kill you. As soon as your father dies, he's ready to kill you. And this is quite a thing. And so what is her response? Well, let's get you out of here. Go take a wife somewhere else. Let's run, flee for your life. Be gone for a while. Maybe it'll all blow over. You'll have to come back. Your brother will forget about all the things you've done to him. She misread. The brother wasn't so angry. It doesn't say because of what Jacob did. Esau hated Jacob rather, verse 41, because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, I think the whole problem is he's upset because of what he ended up getting. Nothing. And he's furious about it. It really doesn't, he's not so concerned that Jacob got a blessing. It's that he was robbed again. And he said that earlier too. He's taken away my blessing. He didn't care if Jacob got a blessing. He just didn't want to not have, he wanted a blessing for himself, and he's got nothing. He's got this anti-blessing blessing. And over that, he's ready to kill his brother. Days of mourning for my father are approaching, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. What a thing. So we read about for Rebekah and Jacob, how this doesn't turn out for them either. It's very bad. Things go badly for them too. Their distress, the upheaval within the family. And then we read about the giving of Abraham's blessing to Jacob in chapter 28, verses 1 through 5. Well, really, the end of chapter 27 all the way into the first part of 28. We read about this Abrahamic blessing. It's given then to Jacob. So there are three blessings in this text. There's the blessing meant originally for Esau. Then there's the blessing that may have been possibly somehow meant for Jacob, but it comes to Esau. And then we read about the Abrahamic blessing coming specifically to Jacob. And so three different blessings are given. So again, in the first, you have a prologue, and in this section we have a prologue. Then we have a first half of it where we have two deceptive plans, one by Isaac and Esau, then one by Rebekah and Jacob. And then we have Jacob gets a blessing by thieving it away from Esau. Then the second half, we have the response of these things. Distress for Isaac and Esau, then distress for Rebekah and Jacob, and then we have a blessing again come to Jacob. This time it's given. The Abrahamic blessing is given by Jacob. It's not stolen away, it's just flat out given to him by choice. And then we close then with this epilogue where we read in verses 6 through 9 about Esau realizing he made this mistake with his parents, but he seeks to rectify it in the most backward of ways. He continues in his disregard of God. He is in every sense a son apart. We knew there was some kind of separation that was going to come. People were going to be divided. And we really see it here. I mean, Jacob is sent back to the family to go get a bride. Esau goes away from those who have been sent away from the family already and goes and gets another bride. I mean, he goes and marries other people. He's just divided already. He's a son apart, separated from the line. He's a different people. He's apart from the blessing, at least in this stage of history, entirely apart from the blessing. We know there'll be a time when all the families of the earth shall be blessed through the descendants, this one descendant of Abraham. But for now, Esau's already, he's a man set apart, distinct, separated from the family line. That's how it ends. He kind of goes his way. I mean, he's still around, but he's in his spirit and in his heart, he's left. Now, I mentioned these three different blessings. I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll conclude things. Again, I'm approaching things this way right now because it's just kind of an overview. And I think by highlighting these three different blessings and talking about them, I think we will make some real progress in understanding the flow of the story, how it works. And then in the weeks ahead, we will be diving into shorter sections at a time. Now, I need to say, first of all, that I owe a debt on this one, at least initially, to getting my thoughts going in this way, to something I heard from John Brashears years ago. And this is way back when we were meeting there regularly, so we're talking about a long time ago now. And he was going through this story, and he mentioned that it had occurred to him for the first time, and it had never occurred to me until he said this, that somehow it's like it occurred to Isaac in this story that Jacob was going to be the one, that maybe he didn't realize it before, but he realizes it now. And I'm not exactly sure I agree entirely with John on that point now, because I see maybe a different possible way to take it. But what got John thinking that was this thing that he noticed in the text. And this was so helpful, is that the distinctions in blessings. Think about if he's meaning to give the real blessing, this great blessing to Esau, and he thinks that that's what he's doing. Look at this first blessing in Genesis chapter 27, verse 27. See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. That's an incredible blessing. But it's kind of just worldly. It's all about this stuff. John described it this way compared to what Jacob gets later in chapter 28. Kind of weak. It's a weak blessing. And it's incredible to think that. Like, this is a weak blessing? I mean, let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. I mean, this sounds like a pretty strong blessing. But what's missing here? There's nothing about the blessings of Abraham. You might find part of a blessing of Abraham at the end of verse 29. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. You could say, well, he's kind of tying in some of the Abrahamic blessings. And I wouldn't argue with you about that. Maybe in some way there's some of what he envisions about coming to him from his father Abraham. He would like for some of that to come to Esau, for Esau not to miss out on that. But all he's really saying here is just that things are going to go well on the earth for Esau. But look what he gives to Jacob later. Chapter 28, verse 3. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. Now that is a strong blessing. That is the full blessing of Abraham passing on now to Jacob. It was never even offered to Esau. I mean, when Isaac thought he was blessing Esau, he never brought these things up. Where did he talk about, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you? He didn't. Where did he talk about that he become a company of peoples? He didn't. Where did he talk about may God give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you? He didn't. So that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. Never offered to Esau. And so a couple things are at play, or possibilities, I think. Either Isaac, he very well aware of the oracle that had been spoken about his children, very aware of Esau and that he sold his birthright. He either has figured out that Jacob is the one and who's going to get the Abrahamic blessings, or he hasn't. But one way or another, he wants to get some things for Esau, to bless Esau. So I think it could work a couple ways. Either he begins this process, he begins to bless Esau, and then he's going to offer some things to Isaac, to Jacob as well. But it's going to be this anti-blessing. It's planned all along to give the first blessing we see to Esau, and the second blessing, which is also in chapter 27, kind of the anti-blessing, he was going to give to Jacob. Maybe that was the plan all along. And then it was just one day, whenever it was apparent to him which one was actually going to deserve to be the one, or God had determined to be the one to, to pass this Abrahamic blessing on through, then he would bless that child. That's one possibility. And I think at least at that time, when this had first struck John, that's kind of what he was thinking. Maybe that might be the case. John might not believe that at all anymore. I don't know. This was all very fresh in his mind when I heard him talk about it. But in my mind, I think it's different. I think he had already knew that Jacob was the son, was the one to whom the Abrahamic blessing should come. And the plan was to sneak in here and give this blessing to Esau, a really big, wonderful blessing, but then to call Jacob in and to give him the Abrahamic blessing. And so I think the second blessing that we find here, that he actually does, in fact, the anti-blessing that he gives to Esau, is kind of a made up on the spot. What can he do? What can he say? What could he possibly give to Esau? And so this is the plan here. So that's the way I see it. There is one part of that verse 40 that might have been something already that was going to be given to Jacob. The last half, when you grow restless, you shall break your brother's yoke from your neck. I think that's something that maybe he might have meant to give to Jacob. We'll see some reasons for that. Now, all that might have just muddied the waters for you a little bit. I hope not, but let me talk about it a little more as we go on here. As we look at this and all that goes on, the first thing that I would say is that when I see Isaac blessing Esau, or attempting to bless Esau, but in fact blessing Jacob, it seems like he's been totally fooled, right? I mean, he was totally fooled. He was shocked later to learn this. And so he's sitting there actively trying to give blessings to Esau. Wonderful, huge blessings. And oops, he was mistaken. He was wrong. And then he gives this other anti-blessing to Esau later. And it's not much of a blessing, but, it includes a lot about strife and sword and hostility, but it's a blessing of sorts. And all of that was just he was surprised with that. It seems like he wasn't planning on these things. This is certainly not anything he did, he didn't plan it this way. This is the way it happened. He was surprised and deceived, and it was tricked into this, and this is what happened. But then later he does very much intentionally give this blessing to Jacob, this Abrahamic blessing. It seems like you have three very different circumstances for these blessings. The first one, he's tricked. He's got some wrong secretive motives. He gets found out. He gets tricked. It goes to the other son. He got duped. And then the second blessing, he's got to come up with something for Esau because he loves him so much. What does he do? Well, about all he can say is, well, eventually you're going to get sick of this and you'll throw off your brother's yoke. But then the third blessing was very much a positive Abrahamic blessing given to Jacob. Very different kinds of things. And we could just read the story that way and be done with it. And I don't think we'd be entirely wrong. I mean, that's a right way to read it. That's good. But there's something that the Bible says that throws a huge wrench in just reading it just like that and leaving it and moving on, like the Bible often does. And so I want us to turn to Hebrews chapter 11 and read verse 20, and then we'll have to scratch our heads and figure out a way to understand the text better. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 20, we read this, Hebrews 11:20. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. What? I could agree. We could see that he, by faith, invoked future blessings on Jacob, that last blessing we've been reading about. He did that by faith. But how in the world did he, by faith, invoke future blessings on Jacob and Esau? This seems crazy. Well, I think we can begin to get an answer if we read Hebrews 11, verse 1. What does he mean by faith? Well, faith is what? The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. At a minimum, surely we can say that when Isaac set out to bless his sons Esau and his son Jacob, that he did it convinced that God would provide future blessings as a result of him passing on these blessings that he intended. I mean, we could, at a minimum, say, I think that's pretty weak, but we could at least say that. Like, in some sense, this was an act of faith, because when he felt that there were real blessings that he was in possession of that God meant to pass on and to continue in later generations. Convinced of this, he acted and sought to give the blessing. And so he was convinced of, he had conviction about things not yet seen. He was assured of what he hoped for. He had confidence in that. You could say that, but I think the problem with that is there's a lot of presumption going on in Isaac's life here, seeking to bless Esau in this way and to do it secretively. It doesn't seem like seems like when you do things of faith, you don't need to be fearful about people finding out about them, or about them not, turning out, about someone finding out about all your lies and deception and your subterfuge. And so I have a hard time believing that this is something he does in this sense, in faith, in the sense that he's confident that God's going to, carry it out, and it just means that. I think it's something else. I think there's a little bit more going on in Isaac's mind and in his heart here. And let me just begin to lay it out. I've got it written out specifically here in my notes, so I want to say it a certain way. So let me kind of read from that a little bit. I think this is what's going on. I think because of Isaac's love for Esau, remember it was his favorite son. Let me also maybe point out here in verse 5. Look at this text here, what it says. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. It doesn't say to her son, to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob. So Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and Rebekah spoke to her son Jacob. It's quite a thing. That isn't consistently identified. The story doesn't consistently identify them, one as one person's son and one as the other, all the way through. But it's interesting that it does that there. One speaks to his son, and the other speaks to her son. And the favoritism, it grew strong. Now, so I think because of Isaac's love for Esau, he could not bear the thought at the birthright being lost so foolishly. He sees his son and he hears what he's done. He just thinks, oh, how could that be? He's lost. I mean, I think he's convinced that Jacob is the one of Abrahamic promise and the Abrahamic line. And so he thinks about Esau and he just thinks, how can it be that he's left with nothing? I mean, I love this boy. And he just, this foolish thing that he did, the inheritance, the physical things that I could set him up so well, the birthright, you know, the privileged place of, in terms of blessing and inheritance and all these things, he's lost it all. He sets out to skirt that legal transaction that was done. He tries to undo Esau's foolishness by secretly giving him this blessing, which will be so strong, and it's in the presence of God, that when God honors it, because that's what God will do, the assumption is, then it will work. And Esau, though he did sell the birthright, he gets this blessing that in effect gives him even more than he lost. And this is a way for Isaac to secure something wonderful for the son that he really loves. A greater blessing than the birthright cost him, than he lost in the birthright. He did it privately. He wants to do it privately to keep from objections from others, to keep from interference of others. He doesn't want Rebekah to come and talk him out of it. He doesn't want to hear from any of his servants about how this is a bad thing. He just wants to do it privately. Son, come in, and he tells his son privately, but Rebekah overheard. He didn't count on that. She overheard. She thought, you wonder, did she think something might be up and she was listening in, or did she just happen to be hearing as she was eavesdropping? I don't know. But this is what he did. He does it that his soul may bless you before I die. Now, Rebekah understands the way these things work, and she says herself in verse 7, when she explains to Jacob what's going on, she says to him that, she said, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, bring me game and prepare for me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord, before I die. That was his intention, to do this thing before the Lord, and she knew it. She knew that what happened in that tent was official business. And it, whatever was said there, because it was done before the Lord in that way, it wasn't just this, he could just change his mind. This was like an official ceremony, you might say, right? So in Isaac's mind, in Rebekah's mind, in Jacob's mind, in Esau's mind, what happens there in that tent, though it's semi-private, you know, Isaac is thinking, this is me and Esau and God, and these things are being declared. This is the way they're thinking about it. This is happening before the Lord. So it's very official. It's without revocation. And we see, of course, you know, Isaac himself saying as much. You know, he was blessed and he will be blessed. Like he took your blessing and he's going to keep it. It's official. It was done. There's no going back. Now, he would love to be able to go back, but you see that he's trembling at the news. He wants to undo it, but he can't because of the way it was done. It was done before the Lord in this official way. And so he can't go back on this thing, that the blessing that was given before the Lord. I think he did not mean to take anything of substance away from Isaac when he did this. He's not trying to take things, away from Jacob. Isaac is not trying to take things away from Jacob, but to give something positive to Esau. I mean, Esau sold his birthright. Esau has been messing up in so many ways, but for all his failures, Isaac still loves him. He's the one he wants. He wants these good things for him. Just like you remember Abraham pleading for Ishmael, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And the only thing that eventually allowed him to prefer Isaac over Ishmael was God telling him, look, I'll provide for Ishmael. I'll look out for him. I'll be with him. I'll bless him. And I think here's Isaac, and he's feeling some of the same way. He wants Ishmael to have some things. And he's not trying to take anything away from Jacob. He just wants, not Ishmael. He wants Isaac or Esau to have things. I'm really messing up the names here. Sorry, guys. hard for you to keep track of what I'm saying when I'm messing up the names. So Isaac wants Esau to get this blessing. He's not trying to take anything away from Jacob. He just wants to do for his son, to give him something of substance. And what he would give him would have been the birthright. But Esau despised that. He didn't even care. So the only thing he's got left is the blessing. Well, let's give him some of this blessing, some of these side benefits of this blessing, the way that God had just provided for him and given him the fat of the land, and he's always had plenty to eat, and even in famine, God's provided. Let's give that to Esau. And so he seeks to do that. But Jacob took even that. Jacob took that blessing. And then what does Isaac have to do now? Well, I think there was a blessing that was going to be reserved for Jacob. And the blessing, I think, was going to go something like this. Everything that we have in chapter 28 about the Abrahamic blessing, but also, when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke, or your brother's yoke, from your neck. I think that was going to be part of this. Because he knew, Isaac knew that the oracle of God was that the older will serve the younger. But he sat here and gave as a blessing, which he thought was to Esau, to the older. He said, be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. There's no way he can do that in a permanent way and still be doing this in faith. Like the Hebrews tells us, he uttered those words in faith. He tried to say that to Esau, but that was something he did in faith. Well, he knew already God said the older is going to serve the younger. And here he is trying to have the younger serve the older, have the older one be Lord over all of his brothers. And all the mother's sons were going to bow down to him. It doesn't fit. It's the exact opposite, unless he's thinking for a time. And in his mind, as he's going to turn around late in the next week or in a few hours, he's going to turn around and call Jacob in. And he's going to tell Jacob, I've made your brother Lord over you. But when you grow restless, right, he's going to tell him, listen, I've made your brother Lord over you. But when you grow restless, you're going to break his yoke from your neck. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you. And he goes into these Abrahamic blessings. The idea is he has in mind a reversal eventually of these things because he's doing this in faith. He can't be acting in faith if he's acting against God. Absolutely. So he can't be trying to, earlier, to set up Esau as the permanent Lord over Jacob. But for a time, and when Jacob were to grow restless, he would break the yoke. But to his great surprise, Jacob snuck in there and took Esau's blessing, and now he gets to be Lord. He gets all the richness of everything. All of it belongs to him. So the one thing he thought he could give Esau, now that's gone. And here Esau comes. What blessing do you have for me, Father? Well, I don't have anything. Look what Isaac's own interpretation of the blessing that he accidentally gave to Jacob. He says in verse 37, Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him Lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son? That's the full extent of what he was trying to do for Esau. He was trying to set him up, at least for a time, as Lord over his brother, to give all of his brothers to him as servants, and with grain and wine to sustain him. I mean, everything, every earthly blessing you could give him, he was going to give him. And now Esau comes in and he knows that's all Esau wants. And Esau says, what do you have for me? He says, what could I possibly give you? So he says, all right, I guess there is one thing. Okay, so the blessing, it's going to have to be like this. You're going to be away from the fatness of the land, which your brother is going to get, which I intended to give you. But since I gave all that to him, I have to say your inheritance is away from those things. That the fatness of the earth, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. So how's he going to live? Well, by your sword. That's how. If you don't have good crop and you don't have, you're not much of a hunter anymore. Like that doesn't work out for you either. You live by the sword. You go and you plunder from people who have. You're the have-not, and you go take from the haves. By your sword you shall live. and you shall serve your brother. That's no way to live, right? By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. And so he gives him that. He says, look, okay, you'll be a servant, but you're going to break his yoke from your neck. This isn't going to last forever. You're still going to have to live by your sword, but you won't be with your brother anymore. He's going to be lord over you for a time, but that'll all stop too. And so this is this second blessing, partly intended, I think, maybe for Jacob initially, but as things worked out, it's given a different form. It's combined with things that can only be said about Esau now. So he tells him, well, you're going to inherit everything away from these things, but eventually you're going to get this. You're going to be able to break his yoke from your neck. That's about all I can say to you. Then this third blessing comes, and you wonder. It's really amazing. I mean, we just read Esau said, don't you have any other blessing to give? And he says, what? I don't have anything to give you. And then we read, he turns around and gives this Abrahamic blessing. Like he had a huge blessing, the greatest blessing he could give. It wasn't for Esau. He was not willing to give it to Esau at that time. That's quite a thing. I mean, you'd think, he'd say, well, I was going to give the Abrahamic blessing, to Jacob, and I was going to give you this other blessing, but Jacob took that, so I'll give it to you. And, just like you remember Jacob does that later in his life. He goes to give a blessing and he switches the hands. And you'd think maybe Isaac kind of just would do that. He'd say, okay, well, we'll just switch it. But he doesn't. He knows Esau is not the child through whom the Abrahamic blessing should pass. And he doesn't even offer it to him. And, it's like seeing that is what I think finally puts Esau over the edge, and he just turns away entirely. And when he sees how upset his parents are at him for the life he's built and the women he's married and the way things have gone, how disappointed they are, he just says, forget it. I'm not even trying anymore. And he just goes on and marries, takes another wife, a third wife, this time from Ishmael's line. So that's what I see here. Now, that's a lot. That's those three blessings explained. I think that helps us kind of get the flow of the story without looking at all of the details. And so I wanted to stop now and what do we say about all this? What's the takeaway? I think there's a lot of takeaways that we can have and we will have as we divide this up into smaller sections. But as a whole, the story as a whole, I think shows us that God's good purposes continue despite the sinfulness of human actions, right? Every person in the story fails and sins in great ways. Isaac's trying to devise a way around the foolishness and the despising of the birthright that Esau had before. He's trying to soften the blow. He's trying to give some of the blessing, maybe possibly to Esau, and then, more to Jacob later. That's not right. He doesn't feel right about it, have a clean conscience about it, because he's trying to do it secretly. Esau himself, we see all that. He threatens to kill his brother. He's marrying these foreign wives. He's making life terrible for his parents and no disregard for God. He's just interested in worldly things, that things don't look good for Esau. We've got Rebekah. Can you imagine a wife undercutting her husband more than she does here? It's unbelievable. How does Esau feel? I know how Jacob feels about Rebekah. How's Esau supposed to feel about his mom? What in the world? Thanks, Mom. Love you too. Wait till Mother's Day this year, what? It's just crazy. What in the world? So Rebekah's just awful. And then she volunteers. It's quite amazing. She volunteers to, when Jacob's not too sure about the plan, she says, if you get cursed, may the curse fall on me. I'll take the consequences. I'll bear the consequences for what happens. And then what happens? The consequences are Esau's ready to kill somebody. And what does she do? Son, run. She doesn't say, it was me, Esau, be angry at me. She says, Jacob, go, flee. It's crazy. She doesn't even do what she said. Not only is she terribly deceptive, not only is she an awful mother to her son Esau, and not exactly a model wife to Jacob or to Isaac, but then she doesn't even do what she said she would do. And then you have Jacob, who goes along with it, and he's concerned. He doesn't object to Rebekah. Oh no, mother, how could we dishonor the Lord and lie in such a way? He just says, well, what if I get caught? What happens then? He just thinks like, as long as I don't get caught, things are good. He's wrong too. He really is this supplanter, this one who grabs by the heel, a cheater. Rightly was he named. So everybody just looks terrible. Everybody sins in great ways, fails in great ways, but the word and the purpose of God continues. God spoke this oracle at the beginning, right? And in the end of this whole thing, it all turned out the way God said it would. Like, if everyone just would have calmed down and just trusted the Lord to do what the Lord would do, it all would have worked out, and they wouldn't have had to sin. They wouldn't have egg on their face. They wouldn't be so dependent on God to just overlook all the things that they have messed up and all the ways they're undeserving. I mean, you'd think they're giving God lots of reasons to pick another family and start afresh. I mean, these guys, this is a mess. But God promised to Abraham that it would be through Isaac that his offspring would be named. And Isaac, for all the good things we've read about Isaac, we've seen some bad things here. And he, what situation is his family and what's the nature of the family there? I mean, maybe the solution should be that he should have another child instead, because these two aren't real good candidates either. But God doesn't do that. The word and the purpose of God continues, and it's more strongly established in so many ways. I mean, we've got a third generation now, and it's come to them, and it's established in that sense. God said that there was going to be two peoples divided. They weren't going to be together. Well, they're divided now. That happened. God said that would happen, and they are divided. Despite all the sinfulness involved, this is what's happened. They're divided, just like God said. There's one people now. Esau is not really a candidate in any way. It's just Jacob. And so this happens. But now, because of the sinfulness of everyone involved, the purposes of God are going to carry forward in ways that the dependence upon God for this to ever happen is more obvious. It's more evident. It's not just like, well, God's going to do his part too. It's like you get to this place and it's like, if Jacob is ever going to become the kind of man that Abraham had become, or the kind of man that Isaac for a good chunk of his life was, even though in this instance he seemed to, we can sympathize with him trying to work things out for Esau, but he certainly, wasn't a model citizen in this case. But so how is Jacob ever going to become a man like that? I mean, it doesn't seem possible. God's going to have to do this. God's going to have to preserve everything. He's going to have to somehow work in Jacob's life to change him, to teach him lessons, to make him a man who loves the Lord and is most earnestly seeking the spiritual blessings, not just the physical. Make him no longer a liar and a cheater. There's a lot of things that are going to have to happen. And those things happen. God makes him serve a man who's a better liar and cheater than he is. And he learns what it's like to be on the other side of things. But this all works out now in ways that it's so obviously dependent on God. Like there's no sense in which we think, oh, Jacob's bringing this about, or Isaac's bringing this about, or Abraham's going to make all these things happen. It's just God. I mean, when you read this story and you think this is the promised line, this is ridiculous. God started over, God flooded the world to restart with Noah, to get us down to Abraham and Terah and his son Abraham were out and out pagans. God started afresh with Abraham, worked in his life for decades and decades and decades, gave him this son, worked in his life for decades, gave him two boys, chose one over the other, and this is what we're left with. I mean, this great big process has left us with Jacob. It's terrible. It's, it doesn't look like, oh, I bet Jacob's the one through whom all the world's going to be blessed. Like you're thinking, well, it's going to be way down the line. Like it's definitely not Jacob, but he's going to be in the lineage, but there remains a lot to be done. So what do we say then? I just say this. It's a great encouragement, I think, to us to know that, I hope it is anyway, to see where things are now and to know where they get. God's purposes are in fact steadfast, right? They're not in danger in times when things have been compromised, and it's not all on, on us to bring these things about. When it gets to the place where it's all on God, things aren't compromised either. Like he can do it. God can handle that. He said, the older is going to serve the younger. He said that, he gave this oracle about these boys, and they come to pass, both in the temperament of the boys and in the details and circumstances of their lives, the nature of their deceptions. God overrules it all. Like what they meant for evil, God means for his good purpose. And this is an amazing thing. There are things, we look at the things that God has promised now, just in terms of the new covenant, that will certainly come to pass. We think about let's just think about missions, for example. Like, here's these people, they're unreached, they don't have the gospel. Some missionary goes and shares the gospel there. And let me go back up and think about just Africa historically. Let's look at that. You got so many missionaries that come there, and they are, like, I think of David Livingstone, and there's so many wonderful things that can be said about him. But here's a guy who goes in to chart the inner parts of Africa and to share the gospel and to bring the gospel there, bringing with him governments who mean to enslave traders, who basically enslave all these people and bring great harm to them. And you just look at that and you think, well, how is the gospel ever going to be believed upon here? Like the people that came in and brought the gospel also brought with them people who meant just awful things for these people. This is terrible. What a misstep. The word of God will never take hold here. These people will reject Christianity forever as the white man's religion. It's not going to work. But it did work. It does work, and it's still working still. It's incredible. It's wonderful to think that despite the missteps, even when we're most well-intended, our errors, our missteps, the things we can't foresee and know about and control, God's using them in such a way to bring his purposes about. And they're steadfast. They're guaranteed. He's faithful. This is probably demonstrated maybe nowhere more clearly than when we think of the cross, right? There was nothing more, there was never an instance where things were more out of sorts than there. Whenever the righteous were suffering more, whenever what should have happened wasn't happening, than on the cross. And yet it's the exact thing that most fulfilled God's purposes. There was never an instance when no one could help us, no one could possibly fix the situation and bring about the purposes of God than God. We were totally dependent on God to do it. And guess what? He did it. He can carry the weight. He can bear the load. He can bring it about. We sang that song, is he worthy? Who can, break the seal and open the scroll? Who can bring about these purposes of God? There's no one who's worthy. We're just totally dependent on God. And he does it. The Lamb who was slain and lives again. He's worthy. He can do it. He can open the scroll. He can bring about the purposes of God. It's so clearly demonstrated when we think about the person of Jesus Christ. But just this lesson, and we see it here, that for all their mistakes, for all their failures, for all their sinning, for all their scheming, God's purposes remain steadfast. They could have just trusted God. At every stage along the way, the people involved could have said, no, I'm going to trust the Lord. As unlikely as it looks. Imagine Rebecca. She hears the scheming of Isaac. And what if she were just to say, I think Jacob's getting ready to do something really bad here, but I trust the Lord with it. She might have found out that Esau got the blessing, the first blessing, but the Abrahamic blessing still went to Jacob and everything worked out just fine. That could have happened. But she did something else instead, and it just looks terrible. And you think, and then Esau's ready to kill Jacob. And you think, Rebecca, what have you done now? Now it's never going to come to pass. Well, no, it still happened. In every step along the way, God preserved what he his intentions and his purposes, his plans, the things he promised were never at risk. Though people put them at risk, they weren't at risk for God. Though people acted foolishly, though people acted in ways that in some ways were against what we know God intended, this is what happened. God's will was perfectly fulfilled and came about. So that's a real encouragement, I think. And that's the big takeaway, again, from this whole section, is that God overruled. His promises to Abraham stood fast, despite the failures of the family. And of course, some of that we get by even knowing further about Jacob's life and trajectory and the things that God does for him. And those begin in chapter 28. But that's all I have for today. The rest, we're going to dive into this kind of, a section at a time and bring things out in more detail, which I think will be really helpful as we do that. So any questions or comments on any of these things?